Awesome. Good afternoon, everybody. As you guys saw on a lot of tweets, this is not exactly a packed room. AngularJS and the Java EE tracks are definitely have drawn a lot of interest. We have a lot to talk about here, but definitely thank you guys for being here. Not a packed room means we're a little bit more comfortable. Also, probably more chances to answer any questions you guys may have. So throughout the afternoon, if you guys have any questions, just try to get my attention out, and I'll try to get to you. And so let me ask you a couple of questions first. Obviously, I'm going to talk about the Microsoft platform. So Windows Phone, any one of you carry Windows Phone and or heard of Windows Phone or work with Windows Phone before? Awesome. And not too many, but that's good too. So just make sure that you guys kind of get an overview of what this is all about. So today I'm going to primarily cover two parts of our application platform, which is Windows Phone on the client side. And if you guys are interested, I could also talk about Windows 8, Windows Store apps as well. But we'll kind of go on that and see if you guys are interested in that. And then the second part, we'll get into Windows Azure, which is the cloud platform, and then kind of talk about what Microsoft means about what we mean by the current generation of the application platform that Microsoft has put together. So the first part, I'll just kind of go over a little bit kind of news, because you guys having been here, definitely thank you so much for the interest in the Microsoft platform. Definitely, it's not exactly a very popular topic at DevOps, but I want to have some good news to share with you guys, because definitely it's not such a bad thing to have some interest in the Microsoft platform anymore. So just to start off this presentation, I want to talk about what Microsoft means by sort of the new application platforms that we're putting together. Before it was .NET, before it was Windows, and just all kinds of technologies that we put together. These days, kind of the generation thought is, the current generation thought is, we want to provide a platform that empowers people for the activities they value the most. And that's a very broad statement. And what we mean by that is basically designing for experiences and building for experiences, rather than, let's say, do something on the client, do something on the web, do something on the server, do something on the cloud, for example, or something specific. We want to be able to tie together experiences really well and seamlessly. And what that boils down to, right, is it's in a simpler form, is great device experiences empowered by services in the cloud. Right? So we're starting to kind of narrow down a little bit in terms of the detail. And what we mean by that, of course, is from the Microsoft platform perspective, right? So we have these investments that we've done on the client side. So Windows obviously powers the PCs and the tablets in the traditional PC ecosystem. Windows Phone, and then Windows Embedded in terms of devices and automobiles, and of course Xbox. Right? So those are kind of considered our client platform. But of course there's more, but this is more of the generalization these days. And on the server side, on the cloud side, right? So on the cloud side, public cloud side is Windows Azure. Windows Azure is very similar to Amazon Web Services, if you guys have used Amazon before. And Windows Server, of course, is for you to build your own data centers or run things within your own environment, in a nutshell. And we'll go over a lot of these in more detail today, but that's kind of where we're starting down, where we design from experiences, but we want to be able to build experiences, really valuable experiences using these components from the Microsoft platform across these different devices and server client-side experiences models. And we want to be able to provide the same programming skills, development tools, languages and frameworks, components and runtimes. So what that means is using the same set of tools you can build across the entire spectrum of client experiences and also server-side services. That's kind of the intention. What we're getting at is you don't need to learn another whole new set of skills, hopefully. Right? The Microsoft stuff is pretty easy to learn these days, even if you haven't dealt with Microsoft stuff before. And I'll show you guys what these tools look like. And maybe just one quick show of hands too, again, is how many of you have played with Visual Studio or built something for the Microsoft platform before? Awesome, thank you. Then I won't show you too many introductory stuff. I'll jump into some of the more development topics. Windows Phone, so we're no longer nobody, which is kind of interesting. We're a pretty nice number 3 in the market right now. And especially in markets outside of the US. So in Europe and in South America and in India and in China, Windows Phone is actually making pretty good progress there. We're still up and coming, but I think the good point is we're no longer a nobody in the marketplace. Right now we have, let's see, just some of these numbers that if you guys can see them. The small text is probably too small, but starting from the left, we have about 15,000 apps submitted that's only 2 weeks, and that's when we start. That's okay, no worries about that. 41,000 new registered developers, 2 billion total app downloads, 75% increase in app downloads. And then the next one is 91% increase in paid app revenue. And the next one is, I think the number for the next one is the top number one app is actually higher. On this slide, it says, because we have a list saying that, let's say 50 apps that people have to have, we're pretty much getting there. We're pretty much getting to the point where if you want an app on an iPhone or Android, we have that app too. We haven't had that too, but we have that app as well. And then the total number of apps in the store right now is about 175,000. So it's up and coming, but it's healthy. And then some more numbers show you guys. Basically, just kind of reinforce your interest in the platform that you're not. It's good that you're interested in the platform. It's actually a good time to get into market right now too. So again, more momentum, especially in Europe. You guys can see, and this is surprising to a lot of people. Where we're considered 10% of market share right now. People used to write us off, but at least we're kind of above that threshold, where it's over 10%. And in some markets, we're higher, like Italy, 13%. And in Mexico, I think that's probably the next point, 13%. And that 13% is actually higher than iOS. So that's a pretty surprising thing for a lot of people, thinking that it will never happen that way, right? People think Windows Phone, it will never go anywhere. But we're growing. We're kind of like a kid growing up. We're kind of like that unpopular geek student in class in the back of the room where nobody's ever noticed, but somehow he's starting to get some attention these days. So we're growing, and it's actually growing pretty fast in terms of the rate. So it's pretty healthy, and it's good that you guys have an interest here, because there is an opportunity for you guys here. And when we talk about opportunity, that's exactly what, right now is the good time to invest in this platform. And some more numbers. And some more numbers. This is our marketing slides. You don't have to read into this. You guys can look at the slides later on. But just a lot of numbers across the platform, the other parts of the platform, like Xbox is really interesting. 76 million consoles, 18 billion hours of entertainment in 2012. Okay, and we'll skip over this. This is much more marketing. What's interesting is for Windows Azure, I guess, because we're going to talk about that later. Over 50% Fortune 500, thousands of actually 1,000 new customers every day. So there's some pretty good adoption numbers there. These are all different parts of the platform that has adoption numbers that are kind of interesting. So a couple examples in terms of what we talk about Windows Phone and what the opportunity means to you guys. This is an app. I think this is one built. I forget where they built this, but it was a game released in March 2012 using only in-app purchase model. And on the Windows Phone platform, this particular game saw 10 times more downloads than iOS, and 2 times revenue than iOS. They have about 100,000 users and powered by 4 servers in Windows Azure. Right? So it's a pretty nice story of someone having some success on the Microsoft platform. Of course, this doesn't happen to everybody, just the same as on the other platforms. But my point here is we have some good stories on our platform as well. And I'll show you guys a couple more. This is an app. This is a game again. I think app coming out of the Russia market. They're seeing that 30% more downloads than iOS and more purchases, 2 times more purchases on Android. Again, the experiences vary because honestly we have heard a lot of game and apps that do much better than on the other platforms, but there are also people who take advantage and have success on our platform too. So it's good that we have a balance, and then it's good that we have some people on the platform doing well as well. Same thing, Joybits. This one you guys probably pretty well aware of. 2.5 million downloads and six times more downloads during Spotlight. So the store itself has a mechanism to showcase apps as well. And this game's been doing really well on the platform too. And one more thing, and this is actually built by one guy on my team. In his spare time, he built a bunch of card games, and he's been having it in the store for quite a while. At the height of his revenue generation, I think earlier this year, he was earning $30,000 per month just from ads. One person. I wish I could do that too, but I didn't catch the opportunity. So and then this is another little graph that was interesting here too at the lower right-hand corner. You see that little hockey jump right there at that was the Windows 8 launch around last year. So he had those games published before, like a year before we actually launched, basically in the preview store. And then when it launched, you guys saw the number just went up like that because the downloads started coming, and he started generating revenue from the ads. The 30,000 happened. The 30,000 revenue per month happened right after the launch, and he was doing it at least for a couple of months like that. So pretty nice story for an individual, just working on some apps on their own time. So the whole point here is, for these few slides, is talk about the opportunity. The opportunity here is, for you guys, is actually, when we talk about when's a good time to invest, right? It's same thing as stock market or the same thing as housing market, where you want to buy low and sell high, right? Right when the market goes up. So this is kind of where we are right now. The Windows Phone platform, or the Windows devices platforms in general, are a little bit lower on the market right now, but we're starting to see momentum. We're starting to get on the uptick. Just like early days in the iOS and Android marketplaces, if you get in early, you have that opportunity to get growth, and you can make money from that. So this is kind of where we are at this moment too. If you're thinking you kind of missed the iOS and Android trains, there's a little bit of opportunity on our side as well. So coming back to this one, we're talking about the platform in general. This is kind of the platform story we're talking about. Is we want to provide the same consistent set of tools and programming models across the entire breadth of the Microsoft platform, so that it's easy to build. And we'll get into more details about this later on today. So for the client side, right, this is kind of what we're focusing these days. And I'll get into more details about that. We're consolidating. So Microsoft platform has a lot of different components before. Windows, just like Java platform, we have different versions of the Windows. We have Windows CE, Windows Embedded, Windows, all kinds of Windows platforms, .NET, Win32, WinForm, all kinds of different platforms. But we're moving towards one consolidated platform, and we're moving towards something that's consistently across different device platforms as well. And that's a new thing called Windows Runtime, which we introduced since Windows 8. And since then, we've brought Windows Runtime, WinRT on the slide there, Windows Runtime from Windows 8 itself to Windows Phone 8, and then eventually to Xbox as well. And then, of course, that's going to be the same OS and kernel that powers all of the different device experiences. So when we talk about the same consistent device experiences, we're moving towards the area where you could get to the point where it's much easier to build one app and then reuse parts of it across different and different code and different things across different device platforms. Excuse me. And on the cloud side, right? So the client side is kind of that story. On the cloud side, it's even better. We're really moving towards the open platform. It's for Windows Azure, which is what my sort of the main topic about the next talk today is. It's a really open platform. It's not just the Microsoft stack. You will see we put .NET and Java and all of the other really popular stuff right on the slide right here, because you could do all those things in Windows Azure. Again, if you used Amazon before, Windows Azure is very similar to Amazon in terms of the model and the things you can do with it. And then you guys will see more details later on too. But that's kind of the intention, where you could use anything you want on the server side and in the cloud, whether it's in Windows Azure, in our public cloud, or on Windows Server in your own cloud per se. And then use the same programming tools and the languages and frameworks to build client-side devices, apps. So again, just and the tool on the Microsoft platform obviously is Visual Studio. So Visual Studio can be used to build across all these different experiences, just one set of tools. And more other parts of the platform too. So to sum it up, kind of the 4 pillars that we talk about when we want you guys to think about Microsoft platform is in that one single platform that can be used to create new experiences that span kind of the device in the cloud and seamlessly, really easily. Use what you know, right? You could use Java, you could use anything on the server side. On the client side, it's a little bit more of the .NET platform, but you will see more details as well. Better economics, what we mean by that is our stores today have a little bit of differentiation from the other app stores. For example, the percentage revenue share. We start with 80-20, just like the other app stores. But if you make more than $25,000 USD in total for that account, then it becomes 80-20. Sorry, 70. Yeah, 80-20. So we start 70-30, and then we turn into 80-20. Sorry. So there's a little bit of better economics. And then the in-app purchases, we don't take any percent. So we take 0% if you use your own in-app purchase engine. if you use the Microsoft purchase engine, transactional engine to do in-app purchases, we still do the revenue share, 70-30, 80-20 split that I just talked about. But if you use your own, we take 0%. And reach more people across the different platforms that Microsoft platforms have access to. So that's the first part. Any questions, anything you guys want to hear more about? So if not, then let's jump into Windows Phone. So real quick, how many of you guys have actually done Windows Phone development before? Wow, there's a few. So first of all, this part of the talk, I was told to give you guys a little more introductory, kind of the level topic. So if it gets boring, my apologies. But if you have any questions, let me just raise your hand, and I can get into more details on anything else that you guys are interested in. So for this talk, what we want to talk about is, it's actually quite a lot from an introductory perspective. So hopefully there's something that you guys didn't know before. These are all the topics that I want to show you guys, because that's kind of the things you need to think about and the things that you need to know about how to build a Windows Phone app. It's not just opening up Visual Studio and then create code and that's it. There's a lot of things to think about, and I want to make sure that I give you guys a landscape in terms of the things that you want to know, you need to know, and then you could get into details on each one of these areas. So first, development platform. Here's a kind of a slide that's a little bit new. The way to think about this is, so I mentioned earlier, we're Windows Runtime and Windows, right? So right now, from the 8.0 version, Windows Phone 8 and Windows 8, they both run the same Windows Core OS, right? And then on top of that, they run the same Windows Runtime, right? So you see the Windows Runtime core APIs. But then from that point on, we start to differentiate a little bit. So right now, today, there's still different platforms because they have different sets of APIs. In terms of, so the core APIs are the same, but then there are some device-specific APIs that are different from Windows Phone and Windows. For example, on Windows Phone, we have different ways of interacting with the media, different ways of interacting with devices, with the camera, with the gyroscope and the accelerometer, then do Windows. So these APIs are presented differently in different parts of namespaces, for example. And then the languages that we can use to build these apps are different. So on Windows, on the left-hand side, Windows Store apps, you could still use C and C++, or C# and Visual Basic, which is the .NET stack, and the UI can be marked up in XAML. And you could also use JavaScript or HTML. JavaScript actually calls directly the Windows Store APIs in that case. It's a JavaScript runtime that we run on top of the WinRT. So you could use JavaScript to write native apps, calling directly the native APIs. That's a little bit different on the Windows Phone. So on the Windows Phone, that's exactly where the areas that's different, is that you can still use the kind of the .NET and Windows technologies to write native apps. So C and C++, you could use that still to write native apps, and also C# Visual Basic with a XAML, XAML XAML interface UI. But for HTML and JavaScript, you could, but they're not in the native WinRT runtime, so they cannot invoke the WinRT APIs. They're kind of part of, they have an interrupt layer with your code, so you could, for example, create a C# project that opens up some web views, and then there's some interrupt between them. Right? So that's one way to do it. I can show you guys what that looks like later on. But that's one area where right now, Windows Phone and Windows are very different. So if you want to build for Windows Phone, primarily for apps in general, primarily it's the kind of the C# Visual Basic and .NET technologies for apps. And if you want to build some high-performance games, there are some frameworks as well, and I'll show you guys more tools later on. But it's either C or C++ native code or C# or C# .NET technologies. So quickly, just the high-level overview and generation of sort of general statement about the phone platform. Windows Runtime. Yeah, I don't think you guys really need to get into this right now. But the Windows Runtime is that layer that we built that enables the Windows Runtime. So why Microsoft created, so this is a good point. So why Microsoft created this new framework or new application platform called Windows Runtime is because for Windows 8, we wanted to have Windows 8 apps to run on both ARM and x86 architecture devices, hardware devices. So we want to be able to sell ARM-based devices that run Windows in the marketplace. And we wanted a seamless application model to run across both hardware architectures. Traditionally, that doesn't happen that way, right? So traditionally, let's say if we compile for .NET, it's compiled directly for x86. Or if we write native apps, it's compiled directly against Win32, against x86. They can't, if we want to have those apps run on ARM devices, you have to compile them again directly against the ARM frameworks, for example, right? So, but we don't want to get into that situation again. We want to be able to write once and be able to run these apps across hardware architectures. So that's primarily one of the major design considerations for Windows Runtime. And then the APIs we talked about earlier, the Windows Phone platform APIs and Windows Phone APIs. We tried to make the APIs similar across the phone and the Windows ecosystems, but there are some differences, like I mentioned earlier. But think about Windows Runtime as that new layer, and the reason why we built that is so then we could have applications run across both ARM and x86 devices. So Windows Phone, obviously, right? So the phone devices run ARM chips, and then the PCs run x86 and ARM chips. And so that's kind of where we've come from in terms of the Windows Runtime. Tools, right? So this is a little bit more text on the slide, but in addition to what I just talked about, in addition to the Microsoft tools, and there are a lot of cross-platform tools that you can already use to build Windows Phone apps and games. The cross-platform one is PhoneGap, obviously. It's a very popular one. If you want to use HTML5 and JavaScript, PhoneGap can work. AppMobi, Accelerator, and a lot of the other frameworks. Same thing with games. You don't have to use C or C++ directly calling DirectX APIs. You could use Unity 3D. You could use Marmalade. You could use Cocos 2D, Cocos 2DX, and a bunch of other frameworks. Right? So if you have games already built on those things, for example, Unity, and currently we have a lot of Unity games ported into the Windows stores. It's very easy to take that same Unity game implementation and to just almost, in a way, take their Unity deployment target, just say compile for Windows or Windows Phone or Windows Phone. And you have to make some tweaks to conform to the devices and the life cycles, but the game itself is mostly the same. You just have to fit them into the shell, into a new shell. And then, of course, app services in terms of analytics and advertising and a lot of the other things are all available as well. So these are kind of the things that fill out the ecosystem in terms of tools. It's not just Visual Studio. So we walk into design principles. And this might put some of you to sleep again, so I'll try to run over this real quickly. I'm not going to talk about those pillars too much because they're a little bit more abstract. But the one thing to keep in mind is why we talk about this a lot is for Windows Phone development, developing Windows Phone apps, not games. Because for games, you could essentially keep whatever you've used for the other games. You could use whatever UI, whatever interaction model you've designed for the in-game experience, we don't really mind. But for apps, the apps themselves are taking a little bit kind of a different design on Windows Phone. You guys have seen the tile-based designs on Windows Phone and how the tiles animate when you click on the tiles, and how the information architecture is actually being displayed and designed in the apps. Those are a little bit different than the other platforms right now. So a lot of the design principles, we would love you guys to understand that. And when we talk about pride and craftsmanship, it means paying attention to the smallest details in terms of design and layout. And it actually means that it's really good to use blank space. You don't have to squeeze everything onto the same page. You don't have to use up every part of your screen landscape. It's actually good to have some blank spaces on the screen. Right? So that's kind of the major point here. And pay attention to all the little details, everything that lines up. Right? There's a very grid-oriented system in that second picture right here. Everything kind of lines up in the grid system. Right? So there's a lot of attention paid to how things line up. And because there's a lot of things that are intended to be in the spaces as opposed to just everything that's visible. So like and then another good one to talk about here is between these two. Right? Let's say an email application is really easy to design a layout like this, but we actually want, in terms of there's a specific ramping of font sizes that's part of the design as well, from the larger fonts to the medium fonts to the small fonts. There's actually a standard that we specify that says what are the font ramps that you could use, because the different sizes actually bring your eyes differently to the design. Right? It kind of lays out the information hierarchy very nicely without drawing a lot of boxes or borders around it to help you know what you're looking at. And that's a part of the Windows phone design too, or even Windows design. It tends to be really minimalistic. It takes away a lot of the visual noise, but it still uses a lot of different things to help reinforce the information hierarchy. More with less, this is all about, same thing too, but just more or less, this one is about spacing as well. So we want the content to be the primary things on the screen. Right? We don't want a lot of the other bells and whistles or decorations on things, just the content itself. Right? So this type of email client doesn't work really well anymore, but this kind of works better in terms of on a mobile phone device, especially. Fast and fluid means, if you guys play with Windows Phone, you know the animations and the transitions on the Windows Phone are pretty much standard. So if you use the controls that are built into the libraries there, all of the animations and the transitions are built in. So even the animations themselves have a standard. So meaning that there's specific transitions to use when changing from page to page. There's different things that you want to pan around, and then different things will pan in at different speeds per se. Those are all standardized in terms of design. And the animations themselves have purpose as well, so which is why there's a way we don't want all kinds of different transitions or animations across a different ecosystem or across different apps. We want to standardize a lot of the interactions in terms of transitions and animations as well. So the recommendation is to use the built-in default controls. You can extend them, or you could customize them, but the animations and the transitions you could just reuse out of the box. Authentically digital means we want kind of the flat design that's really popular these days. Right? You don't really need to create everything that look like 3D objects in the world. In a very digital system, right, like street signs per se, we don't see a lot of those 3D or really complicated graphics in terms of street signs. Right? We want things. These look like more like street signs because they're really flat, and that's kind of where the authentically digital fundamental means, is that you don't have to use really fancy or a lot of gradients, a lot of details on the graphics. Simple is better. And then Windows 1 means there's a lot of different, the apps can work together. So there are things that Windows Phone platform and Windows platform provide out of the box that you can use to get context, for example, to probe the file system. These are all built in as launchers and choosers, and you'll see later on as well. So you don't have to build those UIs yourself. And you launched a file chooser UI, and you'll be able to get a file from it. You don't have to build your own file chooser UI, for example. So there's a lot of different components you can use from the platform to help you build these apps. So UI framework example. For those of you that have built Windows Phone applications before, this is not so new to you guys. And essentially, the talking point here is, for those of you that haven't dealt with YAML before, it's just like the programming model is just like HTML, right? So you use it to mark up a UI, and it has a layout engine to help you lay out the components on the UI, and then you could put code behind to drive the UI. But the programming model is very similar. But XAML, why we choose to use XAML is because we add a lot of behaviors to XAML. So there's a lot of things that you can use out of the box from XAML that's really powerful. And we'll show you guys later on what that looks like. Oh, so for this one is, the talking point for those two boxes down there is that everything that we generate or we use in XAML can also be done in code. Right? So that's actually a really interesting point about .NET and the XAML platform as well. Is you could write code to do exactly the same thing, or you could just use a few lines of XAML to do the same, or you can mix them up, depending on how you program. Depending on how you like to do things. For example, if you do HTML5 apps, then you do a lot of jQuery stuff to create objects, you could do that all in code in XAML as well. But there's a lot of benefit to do things in XAML. Hopefully we'll get some coverage on that. Controls, so reusable, customizable, signature controls. So the controls, because they're XAML, so they're fully customizable. You could style them, you could templatize them. And so they're basically out of the box, the typical ones, just like on the other platforms: push buttons, checkboxes, text boxes, everything that you would expect is there. And what we've done also is on some what we call signature controls. Signature controls are what we call kind of like the ones that are a little bit uniquely Windows Phone. So you guys know about Panorama and pivot control, long list selectors, app bars. And we'll show you guys what these things look like. Standard controls are the ones that you would expect out of the box, just from any other platform. And then there's toolkit controls that are kind of like in the third-party ecosystem that you could download and install into the project directly within Visual Studio. So these kind of fills out your toolbox of controls. So signature control, right? Panorama. This is kind of one of the major things about Windows Phone is instead of tabs and tabs that you have to tab through, we put it together in one panorama and kind of pan through that panorama. Right? So there's a little bit of different design on that because it's a little bit more intuitive to think of one big page of paper that you slide back and forth across the screen, as opposed to different tabs that you had to move in front of each other. And that's kind of the panorama control that you could use to build a content that spans a lot of different screen sizes for your phone app. And the pivot control, same thing as well, is that instead of different lists and different views of that list, instead of using maybe a drop-down list to change a different view, you could just use the pivot control to change. For example, on the inbox, if you swipe, then it goes from on red and then to flag. So different views of the same list. But it's displayed front and center on the page, so the user knows what to do. And then what we always do is a lot of these controls show a little peak on the side, right? So meaning that some content is always on the side that suggests there's more on the side. So then that's the way to suggest there's more content to do, as opposed to maybe an arrow that says more or something else. But we usually just let the content peak a little bit. And the long list selector is another different one that's a little bit uniquely Windows Phone. So if you have a long list of contacts in your phone book, for example, and then if you click on B, it'll jump to this jump list. So you could jump from B all the way, like from that screen, if you have 500 contacts here, you don't want to scroll up all the way down to Z. You could touch B, which will bring up the jump list, and you could jump to Z right away. Right? So that's another, but that's not the only way to do it, right? So that's just one example. But if you have a really long list, there's different ways to zoom out of that view into a different context, and then be able to jump to the other sections of that same list. And same thing with the grid view. So for example, here is you could jump into a grid view as well, as opposed to a list of the individual pictures in that case, right? And then you could contextualize it by the dates. For example, August 2009, or you could put different groupings in there. So there's a lot of different ways to customize these things. And to talk about a couple of examples, Foursquare has very interesting design. It uses what we call, so this one uses the pivot control really well. Right? It still has that signature look from Foursquare where this is a live map control up here, where if you zoom in on different things, where if you click on any one of these things, it'll actually change that map control. So you know right away that Foursquare is about location, but it doesn't take up the entire landscape. And then down here is where the pivot control is. So you could do explore, you can pivot to activity. In this case, this is what the pivot looks like afterwards. And then pivot again, it goes to profile. And on each one of these pivots, the content can look very different. Right? So that's kind of a really good example of pivot control, and then different ways of layering out the UIs on that control, on that app. And another one's Twitter. So everybody uses Twitter. These are really popular apps. Twitter still has a very consistent look across different devices, but this one's a little bit, they customize it for Windows Phone. This one is also a pivot control up here. But it's not just text, but works exactly the same way. Works exactly the same in terms of the swiping to move between different sections. And then the animations are very much Windows Phone as you pivot through these different pivots, different sections. So pages and navigation. Pages contain content, that's obviously. So the way to think about this, let me just build out the way to think about this is how to lay out a UI in the Windows Phone. It's the same thing as thinking about pages from a web page perspective. And the navigations for example, when you start the app, it always starts in the main page. And you can lay out the controls on that page. Whether you could put one panorama control on that one page, or a pivot control on that one page, or it could be just one page and then goes to other pages as well. Right? So it's a page-to-page navigation model. And between different, so the frame is the top level container. The frame itself doesn't have any content. It's just a frame that you could use, a frame class object that you can use to store things or even control things at app level. And what the frame does, the first thing is bring up a one page, and then you can have that page fill the app with the stuff, basically application pages. And then apps navigate between pages, passing data between them, and we do that data passing by use of URIs, right? So if you navigate from one page to another page, and you want that page to bring up a specific context, you will pass it some URI, for example, even parameters in URI, just like you would on a web page. And then the code behind that web page will be able to pull up the information as well. That's the best way to make sure that so for example, if you have a collection of things and you want to navigate into different parts of the collection, you will pass that collection ID or group ID into another page. So then when that page comes up, it'll display that right group ID. Pages navigation, so yeah, we just kind of talk about this. Yeah, just more of the same thing. And too small for you guys to read too. And we just talked about this. So maybe real quick, for those of you that haven't seen what this is all about, let me just do a real quick demo. And so Visual Studio 2003, I'll just do a new, so just for those of you that haven't done this before, for the few of you, in Visual Studio, everything is under projects. When you do a new project, you can select a lot of different types of projects. And that's, for example, you see here, you can see a little bit. So Windows Store for building Windows 8 apps, and then there's web, there's cloud, Silverlight, right? So Windows Phone. And this is organized by languages. So I'm just gonna select Windows Phone right now, and just click OK, create a new project. And these are all templates, right? So I forgot to tell you guys about the templates. Each project type has a different template, and I just select the default one out of the Windows Phone. So there's a lot. You guys saw probably a lot of different templates within Windows Phone. And they bring up different types of apps that are already created. So for example, right now, if I hit run, this would actually run. So it's a good starting place for you to customize. You don't have to wire up a lot of things just to make an app work. It gives you a clean template to start working with, and you could just put in things that you want to do. And the nice thing about XAML, right, so we talked about earlier, here's the designer that you can work with directly. Let me make this a little bit bigger. So you kind of get a WYSIWYG view of things. And you can edit this directly inline. So for example, my first, wow, can't type. My first phone app. There's something running on my dev. And whoops, go back. And you can see, as soon as I remove my mouse cursor from it, the XAML part of it changed as well, right? So this is the XAML markup behind that page. And the XAML is really simple. I'll just roll up, I'll make this bigger, because I don't want to go back to the, actually I can go back to this later. Collapse, and actually, where's flip? Collapse. So show you guys XAML real quick. Like I mentioned earlier, it looks, don't mind the context so much. Let me make this bigger. Beyond sort of the noise about all of these namespaces and things, it actually feels a lot like HTML, right? So it starts with phone, and it just basically defines the phone app. It's a little bit different language, but a lot of it is just start laying out elements on the screen, right? So right now, this whole app only has one grid. And then a lot of the other things are all just properties of that HTML-like program model. And this one has a grid, which has a couple of different things in there. Has another stack panel, and this is what I just changed, right? So there's a text block, there's another text block, and when I changed this, my first phone app on the editor there, it changed right here, and then also it changed right here in the properties as well, right? So as a programmer, you could do this directly in XAML, and it'll update all the other places. You could type right here, or for example, I want to fix that, right? And then it changes right here too. my first phone app. And then similarly back to my first phone app. So that got changed too. So that's kind of the basics of dealing with. So let's call this one, do it in code here. Mini browser. I'll just do a quick hello world app. Right, so you saw as I finished typing it, the editor got changed too. Right, so you could do it anywhere you want. And then what we could do now, we can open the toolbox. Oh, see, I should make this bigger. So the toolbox contains all the built-in controls that you could use. And at this point, you could do a lot of things. For example, I want a text box. Right, so you could click and drag. And resize. And put a button here. It'll do all the alignment stuff for you as well. And then, let's see, web browser control. So the default browser on the Windows Phone is IE, of course. Right, so very basic stuff. And let's say I should give it a name so I can reference it later. Call it URL. And the button, I'll call it Go. And the text, I'll call it Go. Very simple. And let me so then what the XAML looks like here got changed a little bit. Right, so now you see in the grid right there, I have the button and the web browser. Well, my text box got placed outside of it. So I could make a change right here and put it back in. And perhaps actually make a few changes too. Whoops. Make it stretch. Actually, no, actually, no. For the, just make it auto. Alignment, horizontal alignment, make it left. Height, margin, right? So all of these things, actually. Row span, no, I don't want that. Actually, just some real quick changes. I probably broke it already. See, did that work? Yeah, that's right. That's all over the place. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but whoops, no, I don't want that. But I want to show you guys. So let's say text box, and I want to create go back, that's right. Oops. I didn't save it, that's right. And I want to go to my text behind, my code behind. So here's the C# code. Right now there's nothing in there. So I come back here. And oops, there's something wrong. But anyway. I'll probably have to come back and fix that later. But so you guys can see for every XAML page, there's a code behind, which is C# class. And the behaviors for those controls are deposited in that class. And what you can do is basically write code to wire them up. And it's very easy to do that. And you could do that by directly referencing the names. So you don't have to go through another discovery process. You could just reference the names themselves. So here, I want to jump back here for sake of time. So live tiles. Live tiles are really important on Windows Phone. Live tiles are what are part of probably the one unique feature that makes Windows Phone different from all the other platforms. The way to think about live tiles is not just on the start page where you see right there. It's a content area that your app can use to showcase content from your app, dynamic content. So you see on the screen right there how many calls you missed, how many text messages you received. So when you build a game, when you build an app, you can leverage that area to showcase content, to surface content, to pull the user back into your app. And the interesting thing is it's not just a primary tile, right? Your app can create secondary tiles on the device as well. Secondary tiles act as deep links into the app, so they can jump into a specific part of the app. So for example, Facebook or Twitter, for each Twitter person that you follow, you can pin that particular person's feed as another tile onto start page as well. Right? So that's the nice thing about live tiles. Is it's not just the things that launch your app, but literally, let's say if you're a Twitter maniac, Twitter addict, you can have a full start page full of Twitter tiles, of Twitter feeds for every single individual. And that each tile can show different things for that particular user. Right? So that's what secondary tiles are for. And those are things that are very different for Windows Phone that your app can leverage. So that's the thing you want to think about when you use live tiles, when designed for live tiles. And this which I just talked about. Every app has at least one tile, which is the default tile that launches the app. And the tiles have different templates for showcasing the information. Whoops, jumped too fast. And apps can create additional secondary tiles that we just talked about. They can be static or dynamic content. Static meaning it could be just images that you have part of your app. Dynamic content can be things that you push down as a push notification, or things that when you launch the app, or even we could run a background agent to periodically poll. So that's kind of how email works, right? So email polls the server, and then if there are new messages, it'll put that status back on the live tile. Or you can have a push notification that pushes down to the device to show that there's a new data coming. Then you could notify the user to bring them into the app. And in Windows Phone, it's different tile sizes, right? Different tile sizes, you could fit different types of content in there. And Windows Phone supports 3 tile templates. There's flip and iconic. And there's more details on that, but just different things you can do with the tile too. The different ways that the content gets shown on the tiles. Iconic shows that little flat icon. And the cycle you could give it a bunch of images and it'll cycle through those images on the tile. Flip kind of has that flip look and feel, where the front has one context, maybe some image, and then you could flip over to show some text about that particular image. So launchers and choosers. Launchers, we talked about this a little bit earlier. Let me see. So on the phone, when you guys use the phone, anybody if you have Windows Phone, there are a lot of things that we provide as APIs that you could use to use as launchers or choosers in your app. Launchers means you launch another thing to accomplish a task. So for example, maybe you want to send an SMS message. That's an SMS launcher. And you could say, send this message, SMS task launcher, and then the SMS experience will come up without you having to build that UI. So you don't have to. You just have to call the API, and we'll take over and then show the UI to the user. And the user can deal with the user to actually send the SMS message, and the control comes back to your app. Right? So that's a launcher. Chooser means if you want to get contacts from the phone book, from the People Hub, it'll launch the contact chooser experience, from then which you can select a contact and then come back to your app. Right? So that's kind of the experience. But you don't have to build the chooser. You don't have to build the for example, the photo chooser or the file chooser, you don't have to build these UIs into your app. You could just call an API, which is a one line of code, essentially. And it'll bring up that experience and give you back the result that you needed. So that's one thing to think about in terms of building out the app. There's a lot of things you can do with launchers and choosers that you don't have to do yourself. So there's quite a lot of different launchers and choosers here. Maps are one to show the map. Right? So search and share, all of these things are SMS that I just talked about. These are all launchers and choosers that you could use without you having to build a UI. Web content. Also, okay, so this is the interesting one. So there is the web browser control that you can use to show web content. So what we don't want to do, like any other platform, is we don't want you to build a native app that just brings up the browser that goes to your website. Right? That doesn't really do anything. But you can build a hybrid app that shows how, so for example, you could still have a native experience, but bring up a mobile web app, for example, mobile website. But in your native app part, you could build in specific things that integrates with the rest of the platform. So you could add an app bar that does other things that your web page doesn't do. But if you have APIs behind, you can add things to hit that API. And then there's some interrupts you can do. So then you could have a hybrid mode of some native code and a lot of web pages that are hosted in the web browser control. So you can still leverage some of the HTML5 content that you may have on your mobile website today, but you can add integration points in the platform, like live tiles, like app bars, or certain things that you want to do with the phone itself. There's opportunities to do that, and you can publish the app in the App Store as well. So that's another opportunity to think about. This one just talks about the IE10 platform itself, how that it's actually the full IE10 platform. It's not just a minimized version of IE. So it runs a lot of things that the desktop IE runs as well. Making money, so we talked about this a little bit earlier. This is pretty much straightforward for just the same as data platforms. You could do a paid app, paid to download. You could do a trial first and then paid. You could also support in-app purchases, and you could do in-app. So you could do freemium apps that way, or you could do free apps with ads, advertising. Right? So all of these things are valid scenarios. And I don't think we do. So let's see real quick. Sorry, so I jumped around just to see what we have. Excuse me. Sorry, there's something in my throat. Sorry, so like I mentioned earlier, the monetization model is that for everything that you charge through the Microsoft Commerce Store that you do purchase on the phone, we charge a 70-30 revenue split, just like in the other platforms. But if your app reaches above $25,000 threshold for the whole app, for the whole account, so you could publish multiple apps in that account. For that account, we go to 80-20 split. And then in-app purchases, if you use your own payment engine, so for example, payment methods, if you accept these different other payment methods, sorry, not these guys, but if you go to PayPal directly yourself, or some of the other things yourself without going through the phone purchase mechanism, we take 0% revenue share. And so this is one thing that we talk about on Windows Phone too, is mobile operator billing. Is that something that Windows Phone supports really well with a lot of different mobile operators, telecom partners on the market today. So you could bill directly to your mobile phone bill, as opposed to having to put in a credit card to your account. And tips on making money, it's pretty straightforward too, actually. This is nothing new. Use trial API or freemium. People love free apps, right? So free, but then you enable in-app purchases, whether to purchase upgrades for different things in your app. Freemium tends to do really well. Some of the examples that I showed earlier, like my teammate that made $30,000 a month, it's exactly that. It's free to download, but he has advertising in the app, and then he also has in-app purchases. But he actually made a lot more money on the advertising than in-app purchases. People are much more willing to, because it's a card game, so it's a game. People tend to spend a lot of time in there, but not a lot of people do a lot of purchases. Use live tiles. We've seen that from our own analytics that when you use live tiles, people tend to use your apps more. And when they use your apps more, then you have opportunities to make more money. And same thing with push notifications and things. So these are all common themes across all of the platforms that you guys deal with. Ad control, localization, yeah, local revenue. These things make sense. Windows Phone design principles. So that obviously is something that we'd like you guys to do. Localize your app, so I think more publish globally. Localize your app means just build through the slide. Localize your app, right? So make sure that your app is localized for languages that you're publishing in the market, right? So that's a pretty obvious thing too. It's not that hard to do it, and so you may not have to. You may not be able to. If you have a lot of content, you may not be able to localize all your content, but the app itself you should be able to localize. And publish globally, there's a lot of money to be made, even outside the US, especially in Europe right now. The Windows Phone is doing much better in these markets. Watch your memory usage, that's obvious. Act on feedback, update frequency. Those are all really common best practices across different platforms. Build for both. So this is kind of interesting. So if you have built a Windows Phone app, how many of you have actually tried to build a Windows Store app? Okay. Okay, thank you. So not as much as the Windows Phone. So the good thing is, as you saw, the platform is actually very similar across Windows Phone and Windows Store. So it's not exactly the same, right? So you can't just take your Windows Phone project and say, go to Windows Store. There are differences in there that require us to do different things. So the design itself is different. The pivot, the signature controls I mentioned, Panorama, Pivot, they don't exist on Windows platform. On Windows, they look a lot different. So most likely, you'll have to change the UI from the Windows Phone app to form fit the Windows Store, Windows device form factors. But other than that, mostly the UI layer. Other than that, most of the time, your business logic or your view model layers, what we call the MVM model, a lot of the business logic or a lot of the model layers can be reused, and a lot of sort of the underlying objects and classes can be reused. You can just copy and paste into one project and reuse them. The UIs probably has to change a little bit. So for example, I remember I had one of those running. Now this is one of the examples that we have on the hands-on labs, and whenever it comes up, but maybe I'll just, okay, now it's deploying. So if you guys have gone through the training kit, Windows Phone training kit is actually very nice. If you're new to the platform and you want to learn how to do Windows Phone development, download the training kit. The training kit helps you build this particular app from the blank template to the end to kind of the data-driven with content perspective. So this app, right? So it's a category app first. So it jumps down to the page. So I clicked on Chinese, and it goes down to that particular page, and then has a pivot control, right? So you can pivot across different parts of this part of this group, and then you could go into a particular item, for example. And then there's also a pivot control here that looks at different sections of that particular item, right? So that's a typical Windows Phone design. Now the same app. On the Windows side, so just show you real quick, Contoso Cookbook. Right, same as, so if you go to the Windows 8 hands-on labs, you could download this as well, which leads you from a basic template to a full build app as well. As you can see, the UI right now is very different from Windows Phone. It doesn't have the panorama, right? It's still kind of a panorama feel, right? But the layout is very different from what the Windows Phone app did. And the navigation model is still the same, right? So the UI can be very different in terms of each page, but the navigation model or the information architecture is still the same. I can still click on this to go into the Chinese category, where again the layout or the content is shown a little bit differently. It doesn't really have that pivot control here, right? But because we have more landscape, so we can show more items on the screen. And then when I go into an item, it's the same content. Right, where we have the picture, we have the ingredients and directions, but it's just shown differently. Now, the hands-on lab actually shows how to take one of these apps and convert it into Windows Phone or vice versa. So if you guys are interested, this is very interesting to look at. And then there are other best practices as well, but this is kind of a simple case where you could take an existing phone app and then make it into a Windows Store app or vice versa. The games are even easier. Like, for example, Unity, there's even less to do to take a Unity game already built for Windows Phone to make it built for Windows Store. There's actually even less to do. So there's more content on this as well. But if there's a takeaway from this that you have to know, it's just basically it's the design of the app that's made really different between the Windows Store Windows versus the Windows Phone version. Everything else is very similar in terms of the code and the programming model behind everything. Right, so there's an opportunity there too, but for now they're built as different stores. So you would still have to publish to a Windows Store and the Windows Phone Store to be able to publish and have people access it. But the good news, I think we just published last week, was that it used to be that you had to register for both stores individually. I think last week we're starting to consolidate a lot of our efforts. So right now, you could register once, and you could have the same account work for both Windows Phone and Windows 8 stores. They're still separate stores, but you only have to go to registration one time. So I think one of the things that we're trying to say is we're trying to consolidate and simplify a lot of the efforts we're working with Microsoft platform. Even though the phone and the Windows Store platforms today are different, we're trying to make them a lot more similar as we move along in the future. So let's see, any other questions? I'm probably boring you guys to death right now. If you guys would like, I think we can take a quick, that's what I was told, half an hour break, but we could do 15 minutes. If you like, just get up and I'll get prepared for the next one, Windows Azure, and we can talk about Windows Azure in the cloud platform. Okay, thank you so much.